My name is Elaine, and I never thought a piece of cake could carry so much weight. I guess it all started when we moved into his parents' house. You know, I thought it would be temporary, just a few months while we saved up rent. But from the moment I unpacked my boxes, I felt her eyes on every dish, like she was scanning for flaws. She'd pop in to see how we were doing, she said, but the way her shoulders tensed made my mouth go dry. That night, I noticed her lingering in the kitchen after my husband stormed out to take a call. She fiddled with her phone, her jaw locked so tight it looked painful. It was the little things at first, her slipping notes into his coat pocket reminding him I wasn't supportive enough, her shifting my groceries around so I'd never find what I needed. When I finally asked him about it, he looked at me like I was overreacting, soft eyes, gentle tone, but I could feel every doubt settle in my chest like stones. Later, I found one of her notes crumpled behind the couch, accusing me of threatening his family. My hands shook so badly I dropped it. A few weeks ago, my husband insisted we throw her a surprise birthday party. He said she'd been so helpful to us. We baked that cake together, me, his cousin Margaret, and his dad quietly supervising. I still remember the tremor in my fingers as I piped the frosting, the smell so sweet it made my stomach churn. When I carried it downstairs, her eyes lit up in a way that should have made me happy, but instead I felt hollow. She hugged me, pressing in close, and I could feel her hair brush my face. I forced a smile so wide my jaw ached. As she blew out the candles, I stood back, arms crossed, trying not to let her blow out my last bit of hope. I thought about the messages I'd found on my husband's phone that afternoon, little reminders she'd sent him, whispering that he belonged there, not with me, urging him to stay longer. My throat tightened just thinking about it. That evening, she smiled at me and said, low enough that only I could hear, "You made this for me, Elaine. I'll enjoy every bite." My lips trembled. I nodded and watched her take her first forkful, her eyes fluttering closed, like this moment was all hers. The next morning, I woke before anyone else. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst. I slipped into the kitchen and opened the fridge. The cake was there, half gone, the frosting smeared where someone had taken a big slice. My mouth went dry. I grabbed a plate and stared at that missing piece, imagining each bite she'd savored. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was rage, maybe it was relief. I cut the largest slice I could, and, just like she had, I closed my eyes and took a bite. The sweetness hit my tongue, but all I tasted was betrayal. My jaw clenched, tears stinging as I swallowed a chunk of frosting. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the plate. I thought she wouldn't notice. Who expects the birthday girl to get up and finish her own cake, right? But later, when she went back to the fridge and saw the gap, her face went from anticipation to confusion to fury in a heartbeat. She ran her fingers along the empty edge of the platter, mouth opening and closing like she was trying to speak. I watched her from the doorway, my chest tight, my pulse racing. Then she asked, her voice so quiet it felt like a punch, "Where's my cake?" I stepped forward, chin up, heart roaring in my ears. I said, softly, "I guess I wanted a little slice of justice." Her eyes widened. For a moment, the air froze around us, her fury, my calm, like time itself was holding its breath. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since we moved in, I felt like I could breathe. I stepped outside into the dew-soaked grass, my hands still trembling from that morning's rebellion. I could feel the damp chill creeping through my slippers, raising goosebumps on my ankles. In that moment, the cool air felt like a kind of absolution, like I'd shed a layer of fear when I bit into that cake. My chest was tight, shoulders heavy, but there was also a strange lightness, as if some invisible burden had lifted. I crossed my arms, pressing my palms into my sides, trying to regulate the tremor that wouldn't quit. I wanted to savor that aftershock of adrenaline before anyone else stirred. Inside, the kitchen lights clicked on one by one. I could hear the fridge door opening, then soft footsteps approaching. My husband's voice called through the glass door, "Hey, are you okay?" It wasn't anger I heard, but concern tangled with confusion. I looked up at him, saw his brows knit together, and my heart lurched. My jaw went slack, and for a second I couldn't catch my breath. He opened the door and stepped outside, the morning light catching the worry etched around his eyes. He tried to stand close, but I held back, inching away until the porch railing was between us. My fingers found the cold metal, and I wrapped my hand around it like a lifeline. I said, I did something today. My voice was quiet, wobbly, like I was admitting to a crime. He tilted his head, confusion deepening, and I could almost see the conflict in his eyes, wanting to comfort me, but also wanting answers. I swallowed, lips dry, and forced the words out. I took a slice of her cake. He blinked, mouth parting as if to speak, then closed it. His throat worked once, twice. The silence stretched and pulsed around us. My stomach twisted. Was he going to yell? To laugh? To call me crazy? Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair, making it stick up at odd angles. He said, softly, "Why?" And I realized I didn't have a neat explanation. I just knew I needed proof that I wouldn't stay silent forever. I told him about the notes, about the way she behaved behind my back, how she'd undermined us at every turn. My words tumbled out, choked with tears I refused to shed. He listened, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When I finished, the sun was higher, painting golden shafts through the leaves. I watched him process the confession, his mother's interference laid bare, and my small act of defiance. He didn't argue or dismiss me. He just nodded, slow and deliberate, like he was weighing every word. Later that day, I found myself back in the living room, where the party decorations still hung, faded streamers, a few stray balloons clinging to the ceiling. My husband joined me, and together we started pulling things down. His hands brushed mine as we worked, and I felt a flicker of warmth, a tentative truce forming between us. He didn't say it, but I could see he was on my side now. The way he folded the crepe paper with deliberate care, the way his jaw twitched when he paused to meet my eyes, it all said he believed me. By evening, the house felt different, emptied of its earlier tension. We sat side by side on the couch, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were an actual team again. My stomach still ached with leftover anger, but there was hope now, a fragile shoot pushing through cracked concrete. I leaned my head against his shoulder, heart still thudding, and whispered, "Thank you for hearing me." His arm went around my shoulders, squeezing gently. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that cake slice had changed everything. It wasn't just a piece of sponge and frosting, it was the moment I decided I'd stop being the silent guest in my own home. And even though I didn't know what would come next, whether my mother-in-law would fight back or finally relent, I felt ready. My hands were still trembling, sure, but this time it was from a different pulse, the pulse of self-belief. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and let sleep come. I woke that morning feeling like my skin was too tight, my heart hammering against my ribs before my feet even hit the floor. Inside me, something was unraveling. I'd gone back into the living room to clear the last of the decorations, little faded balloons clinging to the ceiling, the remains of the party strewn across the coffee table. And there, tucked under a stray streamer, was my phone buzzing. It was a notification from my husband's messaging app. I picked it up with shaking fingers and saw it, a screenshot he'd sent himself, of a conversation between him and his mother. I stared at the words, my throat closing. She'd messaged him, "Make sure Elaine never finds this. I told her you belong here." He'd replied, "I'm sorry, I promise I'll fix it," and she'd answered, "Good. Keep her here, but don't let her win." My hands were trembling so badly I dropped the phone onto the couch cushion. My chest felt hollow, as if I'd just watched the last crumb of hope fall through my fingers. I sank down, thumb hovering over the image, looking at her words again and again, each glance pulling a wet gasp from my throat. My jaw was locked, my palms sweating, breath catching like I was suffocating. I felt it then, rage and heartbreak wrapped together so tight I thought I might combust. I'd known she was undermining us, but seeing it in her own handwriting, like a poison on his screen, this was a new level of betrayal. I didn't speak. I couldn't. I pressed a hand against my mouth, felt the dry tremor of my breath, and thought about how many times she'd smiled at me while sharpening the blade in private. And then I remembered the video I'd taken the night before, proof of her sabotage, a quick clip on my phone of her opening our bedroom door when she thought I was out, adjusting the thermostat so I'd wake up shivering, text messages she'd sent to his sister painting me as the villain. I dug through my photo gallery until I found it. Proof 1, screenshot of the text conversation between my husband and his mother, showing her instructions to keep me in line. Proof 2, short video clip of her quietly slipping into our room and rearranging the thermostat controls while the lights were off. My hands shook as I tapped play on the video. In the dim glow of the screen, I saw her silhouette moving across our doorway, her fingers creeping over the dial. I saw the smug tilt of her head when she thought no one was watching. My chest was pounding so hard I could feel it in the tips of my ears. I pressed my palms into my eyes and tried to swallow past the lump that had lodged in my throat. I heard his footsteps in the hallway before he arrived, slow and hesitant. He peeked in, eyes flicking from the phone in my hand to my face. I didn't say anything at first, couldn't find the words. He set down a mug of coffee on the table, steam curling into the air we'd poisoned together. He waited for me to speak, and I finally managed. I found everything. I have it all here. I held the phone between us, the proofs glaring back like living things. His face went pale, like he'd just swallowed a block of ice. In that hush, I could feel the weight of every moment she'd undermined me, every time he'd brushed off my concerns. I saw guilt flicker across his features, and then something else, solid resolve. He sat beside me, wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and whispered, "I'm so sorry you had to see this." His voice was gentle, trembling like mine. We spent that morning in silence, watching the proofs on my phone, letting each revelation settle into our bones. He didn't defend her or make excuses. He just held me as I cried, big, heaving sobs that shook my whole body. My jaw unclenched only when he pressed my head against his chest, stroking my hair with a tentative tenderness I hadn't felt in weeks. Later, when I felt steady enough, we gathered everything, the videos, the screenshots, and backed them up. Not for legal reasons, but so that I would never doubt myself again. So that the next time she tried to twist the knife, I'd have the truth in my hands, like a blade of my own. That afternoon, as the sun shifted behind the curtains, I realized something fundamental had changed. I wasn't just the quiet, anxious wife anymore. I was armed with proof, and I had my husband's support. The betrayal was still there, raw and red, but I knew we'd face it together. And that solidarity, that unity, felt like the first real slice of justice I'd ever taken. I woke to the scent of coffee and unease, the way dawn light filtered through the curtains and made everything feel both exposed and fragile. My heart was still racing from yesterday's confession, and my hands felt slick whenever I touched the sheets. I forced myself upright, shaking off the last tendrils of half-formed dreams. Today was the day she would return. By late morning, I could hear her voice drifting up the stairs, bright, clipped tones layered with that same faux concern. My chest constricted, ribs pressing in like an unseen hand. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister's polished wood until my knuckles blanched. She stepped into view, wearing that delicate smile that never reached her eyes, a pastel scarf draping her shoulders like armor. "Morning, dear," she said, voice saccharine. The way she emphasized "dear" made my blood pulse. I nodded, mouth dry, and managed a soft hello. My throat felt raw, and I could taste the dryness of old paper on my tongue. She glanced past me at the living room, where yesterday's leftover decorations lay limp and sagging. "Oh, what happened here?" Her tone was casual, like she'd stumbled on a broken vase or a toppled lamp. I took a breath, trying to steady the tremor in my voice. "We cleaned up from the party," I said, forcing my shoulders to relax. Every muscle in my back coiled tight, but I refused to let her see. She stepped forward, inspecting a stray balloon. Your husband must be very thoughtful." She turned that knife of a smile on me. I felt my jaw lock. A low hum of anger vibrated in my gut. I could almost hear its echo in my ears. Later, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee cup in hand, replaying her words. My fingers drifted over the smooth ceramic rim, seeking the steadiness I'd lost. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the hydrangeas, petals brushing against the window, a soft reminder that life outside this house went on. But inside, everything felt like a battlefield. That afternoon, she hovered in the kitchen again, helping with lunch. She chopped vegetables with precise, deliberate motions, angled so I'd see every flick of her knife. She hummed a cheerful tune, and my skin prickled. I slipped out, escaping to the yard. The grass was damp, tiny beads of dew clinging to the blades, and I pressed my palms against the cool earth, grounding myself. My breath slowed, each inhale gathering strength. I realized then that waiting for her next move was only letting her script this story. If I wanted peace, or even just a chance at it, I needed to act. Not with violence, but with a quiet kind of retribution she wouldn't see coming. I closed my eyes and let the plan form, each detail sharpening like a blade. That evening, my husband suggested we dine together in the formal dining room, the one she'd insisted on setting for her birthday party. He hesitated, watching my face, concern knitting his brow. I nodded, meeting his eyes. He reached across the table, thumb brushing my hand, and I felt a spark of calm. She arrived with a flourish of silk and perfume, expecting that same stage she'd so often commanded. Candles glowed along the table, their flicker dancing in her eyes. She complimented every detail, napkins folded just so, crystal glasses catching the light. I caught her gaze, felt the challenge there, I'm still in control. But tonight, I was ready. When she poured herself a glass of wine, I monitored my pulse until it slowed. I took each bite of our meal deliberately, savoring its textures and flavors. Somewhere between the roasted vegetables and grilled fish, I reached under the table and slipped a small envelope across to my husband. His fingers brushed mine as he picked it up. He opened it quietly and read. I saw his eyes flicker with something, surprise, maybe relief. When he looked back at me, his expression was undisguised support. Across the table, she noticed the exchange, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before she masked it. After dessert, she leaned back in her chair, satisfied. I allowed myself a small smile. Tomorrow, I knew, I'd have to follow through on what we'd arranged. But in that moment, with candlelight painting warmth across my face and my husband's unwavering gaze beside me, I felt a shift. The power had moved, just a bit, into my hands. I left the table first, heart steady, shoulders lighter. She lingered, studying my empty seat. I paused in the hallway, letting the silence stretch. My pulse was calm now, each beat a reminder that I'd reclaimed something she'd taken from me. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew I was no longer simply reacting. I was acting. I couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house sounded like her footsteps coming to undo my work. I lay awake, mind racing, recalling our plan over and over. When the dawn light filtered through the curtains, I sat up, heart drumming in my ears. I pulled on my slippers, careful not to wake him, and slipped downstairs. In the kitchen, I found the ingredients I'd hidden earlier. Flour dust coated the counter, and the faint scent of vanilla lingered in the air. My hands trembled as I assembled everything. This was the moment I'd promised myself I would seize. I measured, mixed, and stirred, the spoon cutting through the batter like a promise. With each rotation, the weight in my chest lightened, replaced by a cold determination. When the batter glowed pale on the spoon, I poured it into the pan and slid it into the oven. By the time she arrived for tea, everything looked ordinary, down to the fragile doilies and her favorite cup. I'd practiced my smile in the mirror, smoothing the creases beside my eyes until they looked genuine, almost warm. When she stepped in, scarf still draped around her neck, she paused at the door. "Oh, is this for me?" she asked, voice clipped with expectation. I nodded, hiding the shift of nerves in my chest. "I thought a small snack would be nice today," I said softly. My throat felt tight. My pulse throbbed like a warning bell. She sank into the armchair, smoothing her skirt over her knees. I placed the tray on the coffee table and sat opposite her, knees brushing tentatively. Our eyes met, and I could feel the tension crackling between us, like electricity under the skin. I poured tea into her cup, hands deliberate, controlled. She took a small bite of cake, frosting gliding past her lips. The moment her teeth sank into the crumb, I saw it, a flicker of surprise. Her eyes narrowed, a muscle in her cheek twitching. I kept my face still, allowing the seconds to stretch, savoring the rise of heat in my own cheeks. "Something different," she said, voice tight. She frowned. My stomach clenched. But I held my ground. Outside, the wind rustled the hedges and a bird called softly. It felt like the whole world paused to watch. She took another bite. Her shoulders stiffened. She set the cup down with a quiet clink. I pretended not to notice how her breathing hitched. When she spoke again, it was more measured. "What did you put in this?" A rush of adrenaline sent pins along my spine. I leaned forward, smiling gently, letting my gaze hold hers. "A little extra love," I whispered. "And maybe a hint of truth." She stared at me, pale and trembling, and for the first time, I saw real fear dance behind her eyes. My own hands were shaking now, but with something different, exhilaration. The verdict would be hers to reveal, but the uncertainty was mine to savor. She rose abruptly, clutching the back of the chair. I watched her, heart racing, as she set her jaw, as her knuckles whitened where they gripped the wood. Then she turned and fled to the bathroom, every stride a confession I'd forced out. I waited in that living room, heartbeat echoing in my ears, until I heard the faucet turn on. Then I stood and walked to the hallway, pressing my palm against the cool wall. My jaw was slack, senses sharpened. She stumbled out, face drawn, and paused at the threshold, eyes flicking to me before flicking away. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a cake. It was about claiming my space in this house, in his life. And as her silhouette trembled behind me, caught between anger and shame, I felt the real victory, knowing I'd unsettled her carefully crafted control. My breath finally slowed, and the weight in my chest settled into something firm, resolve. Later, when he asked how tea had been, I only smiled. The truth was mine, but my words would wait. We stood side by side, silent allies in a quiet war, the scent of cake lingering between us like a promise. I remember the way my breath caught when the doorbell rang that afternoon. I was in the kitchen, arranging fresh flowers in a vase, just trying to keep my hands busy, you know? My fingers brushed petals and stem, heart going pitter-patter like a warning drum. Outside, I could hear his car pull into the drive. I tensed, shoulders creeping up under my collar, neck stiffening until I felt the muscle knot behind my ear. When he stepped through the door, the weight he carried was something I hadn't seen before. His face, usually warm and familiar, looked cloudy, like he'd been wading through murky water. I set the vase down so hard the glass shivered. My hands were trembling, skin slick with sweat. He cleared his throat. "She's coming for dinner," he said, voice strained. My heart lodged in my throat. I swallowed, jaw clenching so tight my teeth scraped. I tried to steady the tremble in my hands as I followed him into the living room. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, making long stripes that felt like prison bars. I took a shaky breath, leaning against the wall, letting my back press into cool paint like an anchor. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. My ribs felt like they were being squeezed. I could taste the metallic tang of fear. He sighed, looking at me with eyes that searched mine for reassurance. "I told her how things have been," he said. I showed her the videos. I blinked, vision flickering. My stomach dropped, a knot twisting in my gut. It was one thing for me to gather proof, but another for him to deliver it. My limbs went heavy, and I pressed a hand to my belly, trying to calm the churn of panic and hope. Later, I can't say exactly how long, maybe an hour, I found myself setting the table, each plate an echo of the meals she'd once catered solo. I placed the cutlery with a deliberate quiet, as if any sound might tip the balance. My throat was dry, mouth coated in that chalky dryness that comes before tears. Outside, the wind rustled the curtains, and I felt a chill against my ankles despite the heat. She arrived in that same pastel scarf, her posture poised like a statue. She stepped inside, scanned the room, and paused at the table. Then she looked at me. My chest tightened. My jaw locked so stiffly I could feel my cheek muscles burn when I tried to smile. I stood by the sideboard, arms folded in front of me, as though bracing for impact. She approached, voice soft but edged with iron. "You arranged this all?" she asked, nodding toward the table. My pulse throbbed, sending a heat flare up my neck. I answered, voice trembling but firm, "We need to talk." I moved a chair toward her and gestured to sit. My hands were shaking so badly I felt dizzy. She inhaled slowly, then sat, smoothing her skirt over her knees. My husband hovered behind me, silent support anchoring me. I felt his presence like a shield at my back. My hands found mine in front, squeezing until my nails bit into my palms. My breath caught, fear and defiance tangled in my chest. I looked at her, and I saw something crack behind those practiced eyes. The statuesque mask slipped, revealing a flash of confusion, maybe guilt. I spoke, slow and deliberate. I reminded her how I'd moved into this house hoping for warmth, not a war zone. I described each note, each sneaky sabotage, the thermostat trick, the tossed groceries, the whispered doubts she'd planted in our minds. My voice wavered but didn't break. I could feel tears blinking behind my lids, dampness gathering, but I clenched my jaw. She watched me, lips pressed thin, fingers tapping the armrest like a metronome. My heart felt like it might burst, pain and relief coiling together. When I finished, the room turned heavy with silence. She opened her mouth, closed it, then exhaled, a long, shaky sigh that sounded like defeat. After that, I realized the power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer the puppet master pulling strings in the shadows. Here, in that room, with truth laid bare, I held the stage. My hands fell to my sides, pulse slowing, as I waited for her next move. And in that charged stillness, I felt something settle, the first real moment of peace. I could feel my pulse in my throat as I watched her standing by the table, hands folded so tight her knuckles were white. My husband hovered beside me, silent as a guardian, and I leaned into his warmth, grounding myself against the storm I knew was coming. She blinked rapidly, almost like she was unwrapping her defenses in real time. I took a slow breath, trying to steady the tremor in my chest. My fingers drummed against the wood grain of the table, the only thing that felt solid beneath my shaking skin. She cleared her throat, voice just above a whisper. "I don't know what to say," she began. Her eyes darted between my husband's face and mine, as if looking for an anchor she'd lost long ago. My stomach rolled, and I forced my jaw to unclench. I swallowed, tasting copper and fear. I wanted her to feel something, to understand just how deep the wound she'd cut. But I also felt a strange flicker of pity, like seeing her as a flawed person for the first time. I remembered every clandestine move she'd made, the notes tucked in coats, the thermostat dialed to frost my bones, the whispers she'd seeded in his ear that turned my confidence into ash. My body shivered recalling how cold my hands had felt when I discovered that first note, how my chest had seized when the email surfaced. And yet sitting here now, I realized I'd carried bitterness so long it became its own kind of weight. My palms itched, half expecting the paper cuts of old accusations. He stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her arm. His touch was calm but firm, and I could see the relief in his eyes as he stood with me. She flinched, shoulders hunching, like the touch had surprised her. My breath hitched. I could feel compassion wrestling with my anger, each emotion tugging at opposite ends of my gut. After a moment, she looked at me. Her voice wavered, carrying the weight of words unsaid. I never meant for things to go that far. I thought I was protecting him." She pressed her palm to her chest, and I saw her shoulders tremble. The way her breath came in short, sharp gasps made my skin crawl with memory of my own panic attacks. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep the blame heavy, to let her drown in guilt. But another part, deeper and quieter, wanted real reconciliation, like a wound slowly healing. I let out the breath I'd been holding. My palms felt slick with sweat, and I was sure my shirt stuck to my back. Protection, I echoed, voice soft but brittle. You thought that if you kept me on edge, he'd come to you for comfort. You wanted to be his savior. My words landed between us, heavy as stones. I watched her jaw tick, as if she was chewing on the truth. Tears welled in her eyes, and the crease of regret carved her cheeks. My own throat constricted, a lump the size of regret itself. I felt tears pricking behind my eyelids, but I didn't blink. The room was thick with our shared history, the silent dinners, the whispered doubts, the suffocating tension. Outside, the breeze stirred the curtains, reminding me the world kept turning while we stood here, raw and exposed. My husband cleared his throat, stepping closer to both of us. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders and then extended his other hand to her, palm up. We can move forward, he said. There was a quiver in his voice, like he was testing those words for the first time. She swallowed and placed her hand in his, the contact gentle and tentative. In that moment, I felt a shift, like the air realigned around us. I felt tears slip down my cheeks, but I let them fall. My chest felt both heavy with sorrow and light with release, as if a jagged rock had rolled out of place. I want peace, I whispered, though my voice shook so badly I could barely hear it. She nodded, voice muffled. I want that too, she said. Her eyes met mine, and I saw genuine remorse there. I closed the space between us, placing my trembling hand over hers. Her skin was cool against my palm, and I realized how much had been frozen between us. My heart felt both fragile and strong, like it had cracked open and then sealed itself anew. We stood together, three of us in the quiet dining room, breathing in unison. Outside, the scent of blooming flowers drifted through the open window, a fragile promise of new beginnings. I knew the road ahead would be messy. I knew boundaries would have to be drawn and respected. But as I leaned into them, feeling the weight of betrayal lift, I understood that revenge had been a chapter in our story, not the ending. And in that trembling moment, I felt the real power, the choice to forgive, to rebuild, and to finally claim my peace. I woke to a quiet house, the way it feels when everything is waiting to break. My limbs felt heavy, as if coated in lead, and my chest throbbed with the echo of last night's victory. I padded to the window and parted the curtains just enough to let in the pale light. Outside, the garden lay hushed, dew pooling on the rose petals like silent tears. I pressed my forehead to the glass, breath fogging the pain, and let my racing thoughts settle, only briefly, before they surged again. Later, I found myself in the pantry, elbows braced against the shelves. My reflection in the stainless steel door stared back at me, eyes wild, jaw tight, skin pale. I ran a hand through my hair, tangling fingers against my scalp, and felt a pulse of dread curled around my spine. Today, I knew, she would strike back. I could almost feel the coil of her anger twisting in the dark corners of the house. When the front door clicked, I steadied myself, heart pounding so loud it rang in my ears. She stepped in, heels soft against the mat, voice airy, "Good morning, dear." Only it wasn't good. Not anymore. I watched her from the pantry, the way she tilted her chin, eyes scanning the floor for crumbs of praise. I swallowed, throat raw, and stepped out, arms crossed over my chest, trying to make my trembling invisible. She offered tea, her favorite blend, chamomile with a hint of honey, and I took the cup, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. We stood side by side, the kitchen island between us like a fragile truce. She sipped first, lips pursed, then tipped her head back. I followed, careful not to splatter tea down my blouse. The silence stretched until she cleared her throat. "I noticed something odd," she said, voice smooth as silk. "Your cake last week, the flavor was interesting." She watched me, expression neutral, but I could hear the blade sliding free. My pulse stuttered, throat tightening. I forced a tilt of my chin. "You seemed off," I replied, voice low. Maybe it was just a new recipe. My heart hammered, but I refused to blink. Behind her eyes, I saw it, doubt. The faintest crack in her armor. I took a small breath, letting the silence grow heavy around us. Outside, a breeze rustled the ivy against the windowpane. It felt like the world was leaning in, waiting to see who would falter first. She set her cup down with a soft tap and reached for the sugar bowl. Her fingers hovered over the crystals, hesitated, then withdrew. I watched, body coiled like a spring. Then she turned, smoothing her skirt over her knees, and asked, "Are you unhappy here?" The words floated between us, loaded and dangerous. I felt the weight of them, heavy as stones in my stomach. I raised my cup to my lips, tasting the tea, bitter now, like regret. My hands shook so badly I had to catch the rim of the counter. I kept my eyes on her face, memorizing the slight furrow between her brows, the tension in her jaw. "I'm learning," I said, voice trembling but steady. "Maybe this house, this role, just isn't mine." Each word cut through the dense air, leaving a hollow behind. Her posture stiffened. I could see the betrayal flicker in her gaze, that I was turning the knife back on her. A gust of wind rattled the window, and the ivy leaves tapped like knuckles. I took another sip of tea, held it there, then set the cup down with deliberate calm. She inhaled, the scent of chamomile lingering between us like a challenge. Without another word, I laid 2 plates on the counter, one with a fresh slice of cake, the other empty. I slid the empty plate toward her, meeting her eyes. My lips parted in a small, knowing smile. She blinked, confusion warring with suspicion. Then I pointed to the cake. "Go on. Try it again," I urged softly. Her breathing hitched. She looked at the plate as though it might bite her. Outside, the sky brightened, casting long shadows across the tile. She lifted a fork with trembling fingers, hand brushing mine as she reached. I felt a spark of triumph flare in my chest. When she pierced the cake, eyes never leaving mine, I held my breath. She tasted it, and the moment her lips closed over the crumb, I saw the memory of my own defiance reflected in her eyes, fear, guilt, and something else I couldn't name. The silence burst like glass, shards of truth flying between us. I watched her face pale, jaw slack, and I felt the power shift, slow and steady, into my hands. She looked up, mouth half open, and I realized the war wasn't over. But in that charged quiet, with her trembling across from me and the empty plate waiting, I knew I had claimed my ground, slice by calculated slice. I woke early, heart drumming in my ears, when he announced he'd shown her the videos. His voice was low and serious, like a judge delivering a verdict. My chest tightened and I pressed both palms into my thighs to steady the tremor. I could taste coffee in the air though I hadn't brewed any yet, and every breath felt heavy with anticipation. I followed him out of the bedroom, my bare feet brushing cool wood, and watched his shoulders squared in the hallway light. We moved in silence through the living room, where dust motes swirled in beams of sunlight. I closed my eyes for a split second, picturing her face when she'd learned the truth, that the warmth she'd built around us had been based on lies. My jaw relaxed and clenched like a trap, and I felt the pulse at my wrist pound a warning. He set a hand on my shoulder, both comforting and firm, and I nodded. A soft murmur drifted from the dining room. Our mother-in-law sat rigid at the table, hands splayed flat as though she expected the surface to crack. When we stepped into view, she lifted her gaze, eyes wide and glistening. The morning light caught her hair, haloing her in pale strands, but her expression was anything but forgiving. She swallowed, pressed her lips together, and her chin trembled. My stomach twisted. My hands dove into my cardigan pockets, seeking the reassurance of fabric. Her lips parted, then closed again as if she'd rehearsed an apology she couldn't quite find. My pulse thundered, breath stuttering between my ribs. A bird called outside, its song bright and mocking. I drew in a shaky breath, letting the sound fill the silent gap. He cleared his throat. "She knows everything now," he said, voice steady. "Every message, every late-night video, every secret sabotage. His words hung in the air like smoldering embers. I watched her cheeks flush, a bitter color blooming against her pale skin. She pressed her hands to her lap and lowered her gaze, shoulders folding inward. I took a careful step closer, each movement measured. My heart pounded so loudly I feared she might hear it. She looked up, eyes glistening and guarded. For a moment, vulnerability flickered in her pupils, as though the walls she'd built were crumbling. My own muscles coiled with conflicting impulses, anger flared, but so did a tenderness I hadn't expected. "You put them there," I said, voice small but clear. The echo of my words startled me. "All the videos and notes were for him to see you for who you really are." My hands were clammy against my skirt, but I kept them still. She nodded once, head hanging. The silence that followed felt too heavy to bear. He squeezed my shoulder and spoke gently, offering her a chance to explain. She drew a slow breath, and when she spoke, her voice was a whisper. "I thought I was protecting him. I didn't realize how much I hurt you both." Her apology trembled with raw honesty. A tear traced a damp path down her cheek. Something inside me shifted at her admission, relief entwined with sorrow. My chest loosened as if a knot had untied itself. I stepped forward and rested my hand on hers. Her skin was cooler than I'd expected, sweat dampening her fingers. In that contact, I felt a fragile connection form between us. Outside, the wind stirred branches against the windowpane. I inhaled and let the world's calm press into my bones. She raised her gaze, meeting mine, and I saw apology in her eyes, a promise that things would be different. My shoulders sagged, tension seeping out with a long breath. He suggested we clear the table together, and as we stacked plates, we fell into an easy rhythm. Her hands no longer trembled, mine only quivered slightly. In that quiet choreography, I sensed that trust was being rebuilt, woven anew through shared tasks and honest speech. The weight of betrayal felt lighter with each dish carried to the sink. When the task was done, we stood side by side, looking at one another without words. Morning light poured through the window, gilding our joined silhouettes. My heart still fluttered, but this time from hope rather than fear. I realized then that telling her the videos had been shown was not an end, but a beginning, one offering accountability and the chance for something better. I sank into the couch, every muscle in my body coiled tight as her boots clicked down the hallway. I could feel the cushions shift beneath my weight, and my pulse pounded so loud I imagined she'd hear it through walls. He was beside me, hand resting on my knee, his presence steadying. She paused at the doorway, her silhouette framed by the soft glow of the dining room light. It felt like a test, that moment, a silent dare to see if I'd flinch. She stepped into the room, hands clasped in front of her, eyes lowered at first. When she finally looked up, our gazes locked. I remembered how, not long ago, I'd trembled at the sight of her. Now I sat straighter, though my jaw still ached from all the clenched nights. My stomach fluttered with old anxiety, but also with a cautious confidence. I could do this, hold my ground, speak my truth. He shifted on the couch and cleared his throat softly. "We thought today we could," he trailed off, searching my eyes, then hers. She nodded, her lips parting into a tentative half-smile. He continued, "Share lunch together, just us. No distractions." I nodded too, and I saw her exhale, as if relief and dread mingled. We moved to the kitchen, where sunlight filtered through curtains in lazy beams. The countertop was cleared except for a few fresh vegetables and a loaf of bread. I reached out, fingers brushing her sleeve as I handed her a knife. She flinched slightly, then set her shoulders and sliced tomatoes with deliberate care. I felt my chest loosen as she worked beside me instead of interference lacing every motion. We talked quietly about small things, the ripening tomatoes in the garden, the neighbor's new cat, memories of my grandmother's kitchen. Her voice was soft, almost shy. I noticed her hands trembling as she chopped herbs, and I saw her lock her jaw before speaking, like she'd rehearsed her words. My heart twisted with empathy, that familiar tension mirrored my own. When the soup was simmering, he lit a candle at the table. I carried 2 mugs from the shelf, noticing my hands didn't shake as much as before. The table felt calmer, the air lighter. We sat, pierced by one another's presence but not by past wounds. I took a sip of soup and felt warmth blossom in my chest. She watched me, eyes reflecting flickering flame. I caught the faintest glimmer of regret in her gaze, and I realized she bore the weight of her actions. I cleared my throat and spoke softly. "I appreciate you being here," I said. My words felt both fragile and powerful. She nodded, swallowing, and replied, "I'm sorry for everything I did. I want to learn." Her voice caught, and I saw tears glisten at the corners of her eyes. My breath hitched at her honesty. In that moment, the past wounds throbbed, every hidden note, every cold night, but my jaw unclenched. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cool, and her grip tightened. The sensation sent a jolt through me, a mix of forgiveness and lingering caution. After lunch, we walked out to the patio together. The early afternoon sun felt gentle on our backs. She paused by the rose bushes, tracing a finger along a stem. I remembered that she once twisted the thermostat and left my feet numb. Now, she stood here, fragile and open. I inhaled deeply and felt the scent of blossoms soothe my nerves. He stood between us, linking our hands. His thumb stroked circles on the back of my hand, and I felt anchored. She looked at me and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a chance." Her voice was small, but bold. I nodded, voice catching. "It's hard," I admitted, "but I want this to work." A breeze stirred, and petals drifted around our feet. The moment stretched, tinged with hopeful uncertainty. I felt tears gather, but I let them fall, washing away the guard I'd built. She reached out and brushed them away, her palm gentle against my cheek. I realized then that our relationship would never be simple, but it could be real. We stayed there until the sun dipped lower, 3 silhouettes on the patio, casting long shadows. I felt the steady beat of my heart, firm beneath my ribs. The war had shifted again, not toward revenge, but toward something new, trust in progress, not perfection. I woke before dawn, heart fluttering like a trapped bird. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant chirp of morning birds. I wrapped my robe tighter around me, feeling each thread brush against my arms, and tried to steady the tremor in my hands. Today, we were hosting my husband's cousin for brunch, a small gathering, he said, to celebrate fresh starts. But my stomach twisted with the memory of every time she'd used hospitality to mask her games. I moved quietly to the fridge, slid open the door, and inhaled the cool air. Eggs nestled next to half-wrapped cheese, the carton's edges stained by yesterday's leaf of lettuce. I grabbed a lemon and felt its bumpy skin under my fingertips, pulses of tension running up my forearm. I wanted everything to be perfect, a visible declaration that I could reclaim this home as mine. Yet beneath that desire lurked fear. What if she managed to turn even this bright morning into another ambush? The front door clicked soon after, and my pulse jolted. My husband stood there, holding a small vase of wildflowers. His smile was gentle but wary. I stepped forward, brushing my palms along the doorframe to ground myself. He handed me the flowers, and I felt warmth spread through my chest. "Breakfast smells good," he said, voice hushed. I nodded, throat tight. "I'm trying a new frittata recipe." In the living room, cushions lined the couch in neat rows, and fresh linens draped the chairs. I had arranged every detail, from the placemats to the playlist of soft acoustic songs I hoped would ward off tension. I was so focused on the details that I almost didn't notice her until she was standing in the hall, framed by the doorway. She wore that pastel scarf again, though today it looked frayed at the edges, like her composure. Her eyes swept over the table, and I felt a lump swell in my throat. She stepped in, head held high. "What a lovely spread," she said, voice smooth. But there was something in the tilt of her smile that made my skin crawl. She pressed a hand to her chest and inhaled the scent of orange blossoms I'd sprinkled on the table. I watched her throat move, a small, deliberate motion. Cousin Emily arrived next, bright-eyed and chatty, and she flitted around with wide curiosity, oohing at every detail. My husband greeted her with a hug, and I poured juice into her glass, hands steady now with practice. Conversation flowed, trivial at first, but soon Cousin Emily mentioned how nice it was that our mother-in-law was always so involved, and how she'd sent a gift basket. My chest tightened. I recalled no gift basket arriving. I felt her elbow brush mine as she leaned forward. "She dropped this off," she said, lifting an ornate parcel from the side table. My throat went dry. Emily handed it to me. My fingers closed around the delicate ribbon, and I tugged it free. Inside, I found various kitchen essentials, fancy oils, herbs, a cookbook. I forced a polite smile as everyone oohed, but inside my stomach churned with rage. It was another move, another piece in her never-ending chess game. I slipped the box to the floor beside the table and cleared my throat. My voice had an edge when I said, "That's very thoughtful of her." My jaw locked as I felt all eyes on me. My hands itched to respond with anger, but I held the knife like a shield. Cousin Emily chirped, unbothered, and bit into a slice of frittata that tasted too salty in my mouth. She watched me, tilting her head. I caught her eye and saw triumph glint there, just for a moment. It skittered away like a shadow, and she plastered on another smile. My pulse hammered, sweat prickled at my temples. I realized she was more dangerous now that we'd reconciled. Her deceptions had simply grown more subtle. And beneath that veneer of generosity, I felt her sabotage still waiting, like a snake coiled in the grass. I stood abruptly, the chair scraping the floor sharply. The noise made everyone jump. I forced a laugh. "I think I'll get the coffee started," I said, voice breathless. I walked away, heart pounding, legs shaky. My hands shook free of the knife's grip as I headed to the kitchen. I leaned against the counter, closed my eyes, and inhaled deep. The laughter and chatter drifted behind me like a storm I wasn't ready to face. My jaw unclenched only when I bit into my lip until I tasted iron. I realized I was alone in my anxiety, and that I'd need every ounce of strength to keep her at bay. That afternoon, I felt the weight of every unopened note and half-smile settle around my shoulders. I was folding laundry in the spare room, towels, sheets, his shirts, when I heard that familiar, deliberate tap on the doorframe. My chest tightened, ribs pressing in as my fingers paused on a fluffy white towel. My hands trembled so badly I thought they might drop the stack. I swallowed, throat raw, and turned slowly. She stood there, arms folded, scarf draping her like a shield. Her posture was too perfect, too composed, and my skin crawled at the sight. My jaw locked, and I pressed my palms into my thighs to push down the tremor. I tried to make my voice sound calm when I said, "Hey." It came out too quiet, but she caught it. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I could feel each click through my bones. She pointed at the towels. "I thought you might like these," she said, voice smooth. My heart lurched. Had she washed them herself? Touched them while I wasn't looking? The thought made my skin prickle. I didn't answer. I set the towel aside and folded the next one. She crossed her arms tighter. "You know," she began, tilting her head, "I miss how things used to be." Her eyes glistened with something that might have been remorse or manipulation, I couldn't tell. My mouth went dry, and I met her gaze head on, forcing my chest to stay still. "Things are different now," I said, voice brittle but steady. She let out a breath that sounded like relief. "I know I messed up," she admitted, stepping closer so I could hear each word. My heart pounded under my collarbone. I remembered the nights I lay awake, replaying her sabotage, the thermostat trick, the hidden messages, the way she'd leaned in with that too-caring smile. My hands itched to pinch the fabric of my robe until I could feel the burn. Instead, I kept folding. She closed the distance between us and placed a single sheet of paper on the laundry basket. My pulse rattled against my ribs. I glanced down. It was an invitation to her birthday dinner next week. My mouth clenched around the silent scream rising in my chest. I looked back at her, breathing shallow. "You want me there?" I managed. She nodded, eyes damp. I'd like that. We could talk, as a family. She swallowed. I felt her confession like a stone settling in my gut. My throat worked, and I grabbed a towel so I'd have something to do with my hands. The fabric was smooth, cool against my palms. I thought about all the times I'd tiptoed around her, careful with my words, my smiles, my presence. I felt the old fear gnawing at me, hungry for a chance to retreat. But something in me had shifted. My hands wrapped the towel tighter. I lifted my head. "Fine," I said. The word came out softer than I intended. She exhaled, relief flooding her features. I gave her back the invitation. She took it, fingers brushing mine. My skin tingled where we touched, an electric flash reminding me that I was alive. She tucked the paper into her scarf. "Thank you," she whispered. Before she left, she paused at the doorway and looked at me, vulnerability raw in her gaze. "I'm sorry I made you feel unwelcome," she said. My chest constricted with both pity and anger. My throat tightened, and tears burned behind my eyes. I swallowed past the lump and said, "Just, don't trick me again." She nodded solemnly, then turned and walked away, heels fading down the hall until the house was quiet again. I stood alone, shoulders heavy, heartbeat echoing in my ears. I gripped the edge of the basket, knuckles white, and closed my eyes. The air felt thick, as though the very walls had absorbed years of tension. I pressed my palms to my temples, willing my pulse to slow. My chest heaved with hot breaths. I realized I'd just agreed to walk back into her territory, into her carefully laid traps. But I also knew I wouldn't ever be the same. Folding that laundry had become a declaration. I wasn't just cleaning up her messes anymore. I was choosing to stand my ground, sheet by sheet, moment by moment. I stacked the towels neatly and carried them back to the linen closet, each step steadying me. Outside, the sun dipped low, dumping golden light across the floorboards. I could hear him calling my name from the kitchen, his voice calm and sure. I turned toward it, spine straightening. The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter, pulled taut by purpose instead of fear. And as I walked to join him, I realized I was ready. For any challenge she'd throw next, I'd be waiting. I could feel compassion wrestling with my anger, each emotion tugging at opposite ends of my gut. My hands were toying with the invitation she'd handed me, the paper crinkling under my fingertips like a secret. We were moments away from leaving for her birthday dinner, her trap, I kept thinking, but my phone buzzed in my pocket, and I realized that I hadn't breathed for the last 10 minutes. I slid it out and saw a message from him, "Ready?" It was simple, but it anchored me. I pocketed the phone and forced my legs to stand. In the hallway mirror, I studied my reflection. My hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping like confessions. My blouse was soft blue, like calm before a storm. My jaw felt locked, cheeks hollow. I pressed my palms against my thighs, willing my pulse to slow. I imagined the living room, set up with her favorite music softly playing in the background, the scent of flowers she'd ordered drifting through the air. My stomach clenched, muscles knotting. I took a shaky breath, long, slow, and let it out like a sigh I didn't know I was holding. He came up behind me, slipped an arm around my waist. I felt his warmth settle against my back, and I leaned into him, closing my eyes for a second. You know that moment when two people's breaths sync? That was it, like our bodies whispered together, "We've got this." He kissed my temple and whispered, "Whatever happens, I'm here." My lips quivered. I nodded, catching a glimpse of my own eyes in the glass, uncertain, but defiant. We stepped into the cool evening air, the sky washed in muted colors. The car ride felt endless, each block a countdown to confrontation. My fingertips tapped nervously on the door frame when we arrived. She greeted us at the door, her smile precise, like a blade wrapped in silk. She welcomed us in, eyes bright but something brittle lurking beneath. I stepped inside, and the world seemed to tilt. The living room was candlelit, soft shadows dancing on the walls. I could smell her perfume, something floral, then a hint of spice. My throat felt raw. She gestured for us to sit on the couch, then slipped away to fetch drinks. We were left in that hush, him beside me, hands folded in his lap. I felt my legs shake so badly I crossed them, pressing them together like a lifeline. When she returned, glasses in hand, the hush broke. She sat opposite us, folding her hands over her own glass. For a moment, no one spoke. Then she offered a toast, to new beginnings, she said, voice smooth like velvet. Her eyes flicked toward me, searching for a reaction. My chest ached. I raised my glass and said, to clarity. My voice came out steadier than I expected. She blinked, paused, then sipped. Conversation began in soft ripples, about family news, work, the weather. Her questions were courteous, but each one felt loaded, like she was mapping my nerves for future ambushes. I answered, keeping my tone friendly but firm. I watched her eyes, how they crinkled when she smiled, but with something calculated hiding underneath. I felt old memories swirl, her rearranging my groceries, slipping notes under his pillow, and my stomach turned. But I reminded myself why I was here, to show that I wasn't afraid anymore. Then she placed her glass down and looked at me directly. Are you comfortable here? It was a simple question, but the weight of it settled like stones in the room. My hands stilled. I took a breath, letting my gaze drift to the flicker of candlelight. My pulse drummed in my ears. I thought about the letters, the videos, the nights when my knees trembled. And I realized compassion had grown stronger than that anger. I uncrossed my legs, sat up straight, and said, I feel accepted. My voice cracked slightly on the last word, but I let it. She exhaled, shoulders relaxing. Her next words were quieter, I'm glad. The tension in her jaw softened, her gaze warm. I saw relief there, genuine and unguarded. My own chest loosened like a held breath finally released. We sat for a moment in that shared calm, and the candles flickered between us, no longer weapons or barriers, but gentle witnesses to a fragile peace. Later, when we rose to leave, I felt different, lighter, steadied by truth and unexpected grace. Outside, the cool night air kissed my cheeks, and I realized that tonight hadn't been a trap. It had been a crossroads. And as we walked away, hand in hand, I knew I was walking into something new, not defined by her sabotage, but by our choice to keep moving forward, together, unburdened by the past. I woke early, heart still fluttering from last night's storm. The dawn light seeped through the curtains in lazy streams, painting the walls with pale gold. My chest felt both light and thick at once, as if I'd carried a weighted blanket to bed and set it aside only moments ago. I lay there listening to the quiet hum of the house, no creaks, no footsteps, just the steady whisper of morning unfolding. Eventually, I slipped out of bed, every movement deliberate to keep the tremor at bay. I stretched, feeling my muscles unknot after a restless night. My robe brushed my calves as I walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The shock made me gasp, jaw unlocking, breath catching in my throat. I stared at my reflection, eyes bright, cheeks flushed, shoulders settled in a way they hadn't been in weeks. Downstairs, the kitchen smelled of faint coffee and yesterday's candle wax. I poured a mug, hands steady now where they used to shake. I cradled the warmth between my palms and breathed deep, letting the steam ease the last tension in my shoulders. Outside, I heard a bird call, sharp, insistent, like a reminder that life moves forward whether we're ready or not. He joined me soon after, padding in with soft socks and a sleepy smile. He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching me sip. Morning, he said quietly, voice hushed but sure. My throat tightened with gratitude, and I squeezed his hand before he could ask if I was okay. He nodded, gentle relief in his eyes, and we stood in companionable silence until the kettle hissed. Later, I drifted into the living room, mug in hand, where she sat on the edge of the couch, her posture tentative, as though she'd rehearsed this moment in her mind 1,000 times. The gift basket she'd brought yesterday rested on the coffee table, fresh bread, jars of jam, a homemade scarf folded neatly atop. She looked up as I approached, and the soft light framed her like a fragile portrait. I set my mug down and offered a small smile. "Thank you for breakfast supplies," I said, nodding toward the basket. My voice sounded calm, but my heart fluttered. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and pressed her lips together before replying, "I thought it might help." Her words were simple, unadorned, no hidden edges this time. We fell into an easy rhythm. I handed her a plate, she poured juice, he sliced fruit. The morning breeze drifted in, ruffling the napkins and carrying the scent of budding roses from the garden. My back uncurled as we moved through small talk about the weather, the neighborhood cat, the way the hydrangeas were finally blooming. I felt genuine warmth ripple through me, dissolving the last icy shards of fear. As we sat at the table, she watched me prepare my plate. I felt her gaze linger, and I looked up across the table at her, our eyes meeting in a quiet accord. I realized neither of us spoke of the past sabotage, of the notes, of the thermostat dialed too low, or the hidden messages. We'd stepped around those memories, but they hovered in the air like ghosts, urging us toward new ground. She cleared her throat softly and said, "I want to apologize again, for everything." Her voice wavered, sincere. I felt tears sting the corners of my eyes, but I held them back, nodding. "I know," I whispered. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her fingers trembled under my palm. I squeezed gently, an unspoken promise to move forward together. After breakfast, we all ventured into the garden. The sun was high now, warming our skin as we stood among the blooms. He showed her the new rosebush we'd planted, and she knelt to inspect it, brushing petals with tender fingertips. I watched her, the way her shoulders relaxed, the way her mouth curved in a genuine smile rather than a calculated one. My chest warmed with something like hope. We spent the rest of the morning tending the yard together, pulling weeds, trimming branches, laughing at how clumsy we looked with gardening gloves too big. My arms ached in the best way, muscles reminding me I was alive. I glanced at her as she pruned wilted leaves, and I realized the empowerment I'd felt in claiming my space had come full circle. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about reclaiming harmony. When we finally paused, she handed me a gardening glove filled with daisies. "For you," she said softly. I inhaled their sweet scent, petals brushing my palm, and I nodded, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. Not tears of sorrow or rage, but of release. I lifted the flowers to my nose, closing my eyes as the breeze carried bird songs and the distant hum of life settling into a new rhythm. Standing there, surrounded by blooms and sunlight, I felt the last of the storm within me subside. My heart fluttered only with gratitude now. And though I knew the future held its own trials, I realized I was ready, grounded in truth, supported by love, and buoyed by a fragile, beautiful peace. I sat on the deck as the first hints of morning light brushed the sky, my fingers trailing along the wooden slats. The air smelled of dew and growing things, and for a moment my chest unclenched, letting a quiet ease settle beneath my ribcage. I'd spent the night thinking about everything we'd weathered, the hidden notes, the stolen moments of fear, the candles that witnessed our standoff, and now it all felt both distant and too close to ignore. He joined me, coffee in hand, his eyes soft with that familiar warmth. I took the mug he offered, feeling the steam mingle with the cool breeze. My hands shook only slightly as I wrapped my fingers around the handle. He sat beside me, shoulders brushing mine, and I felt the ache of solitude dissolve. We breathed in unison, the silence between us rich and unforced. Later, she emerged from the house, holding a small tray of fresh berries and yogurt. Her steps were tentative, each one measured as though she worried she might disrupt the fragile peace. My heart fluttered, ease mingled with residual tension, but I nodded, inviting her into our quiet ritual. She placed the tray on the low table, and I noticed her knuckles were pale where she gripped the edges. We ate together without speaking at first, the soft sounds of spoons tapping bowls punctuating the air. My jaw unclenched as I tasted sweetness on my tongue, the tang of strawberries grounding me. She glanced at me, eyes meeting mine, and I saw vulnerability there, like raw earth waiting for rain. My pulse slowed, and I realized we'd come a long way from that first stolen cake slice. I cleared my throat and said, "Thanks for sharing breakfast." My voice felt steady, though my stomach fluttered. She smiled, a genuine curve of lips, and replied, "Thank you for letting me." The words were simple but heavy with meaning. He squeezed my hand, grounding me further. As the morning light shifted, we moved to tend the small garden by the deck. She handed me pruning shears, and I felt the weight of their smooth handles warm my palm. Together, we snipped away wilted blooms, each cut a symbol of what we'd shed, the lies, the manipulations, the cold distance. My arms moved in rhythmic motion, sweat beading at my hairline, and I found a meditative calm in the task. She paused before a rosebush, brushing a petal with her fingertip. I watched the way her fingers shook slightly, and I remembered how I'd once stood in the kitchen trembling at her interference. Now, I felt a steady compassion bloom in my chest. I stepped forward and brushed my thumb across that same petal, feeling its softness. "They're beautiful," I said. She looked at me, and tears glistened in her eyes. "I'll protect them," she whispered. My heart swelled. This wasn't a promise to sabotage, but to nurture. I nodded, voice catching, "Together." The day unfolded around us, sunlight dancing on leaves, a bird's song drifting through the air. We laughed softly when a stray petal fell on her tray of clippers, and he joined in, the three of us weaving a tapestry of moments that felt fragile and sacred. My muscles ached pleasantly from bending and reaching, a physical echo of the emotional weight that lifted with each shared act. By afternoon, the garden looked renewed, fresh soil turned, petals trimmed, a sense of hope planted alongside the roots. We stood back, survey our work like artisans unveiling a masterpiece. The tension that once stained the air was gone, replaced by warmth that pulsed through my veins. I realized the real revenge, quietly claiming my own narrative, had transformed into something richer, shared growth. When she finally turned to leave, she hugged me with a gentle pressure that spoke of apology and hope. My arms closed around her, and I felt the soft rhythm of her breath against mine. I whispered, "Thank you," meaning every tremor in my voice. As the door closed behind her, I sank against the doorframe, breathing in the calm. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him, letting the weight of the past drift away. The house felt like home at last, not just a building, but a vessel for change and forgiveness. I stepped forward then, toes brushing the threshold, and looked at the garden we tended. The roses stood tall, petals uncurling in sunlight. I pressed my hand to the wood of the deck, grounding myself. The breeze kissed my skin, and I realized that I'd reclaimed more than space, I'd reclaimed peace. And in that gentle promise of new beginnings, I felt the true sweetness of victory.